Okay, hi everyone, SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and I'm here with the next installment of our opening survey, which we're going to be talking about lovely sister openings for the Modern with the G6 and also the Pirc. I'm gonna just a quick thing. I know I haven't made many videos lately. Kind of a crazy time in my life. I just finished moving, but I'm not finished moving because I have to move to university next. So I'm in a very temporary spot right now. Lots of fun. And so it's suitable that I'm talking about a very fun set of openings. And this is going to be an extremely difficult video for me to do. In these videos, I try and talk about the general plans that both sides are trying to do. The ideas, not the individual move order, so to speak, but just the ideas. This is extremely tough because in this type of opening, I've played this G6 system quite a bit in the past. It's so flexible for both sides. White can do almost anything, black can do almost anything. Both sides are, sometimes they can ignore each other, sometimes it's a dance. It's extremely difficult to just talk about general ideas. And kind of to prove that, I've got a whole bunch of games here. Most of them are with me as black, some of them are as white, doesn't matter. And just look at how different the positions are. And so if we look at this game, here, this is very, very standard. White's developing normally, black's developing normally. You'll see after knight f3, see pieces on normal squares, pieces on normal squares. This is one type of position. But then let's compare it to this, where white's putting pawn on the d3 instead. And so, again, we got normal development for both sides, but we got this completely different center right now. It's not as vulnerable to a counterattack from black, but it also has less power to influence the center. So that's different. How about this one, where after c4 and then, well, we can see immediately this is completely different. And we got this knight over here on g3. We got 3 pawns in the center. Black actually has some pawns over here. Actually, we'll see a couple moves where white's got the center and knight's over here. Black is expanding on the queen side. He's moved his knight over here. Completely different. Next. Already it's different. Look, we got the pawn on c3 trying to blunt the bishop. Then we have this d5. It doesn't even look like the same opening, right? How many more do I got? I think 1, 2 more? Yeah. So, from here, at this point, both looks almost like that first example where both sides have been developing normally. But then, bishop b5, take. The pawn structure has changed. We got some worse pawns, but we got this open file. Maybe the rook can also slide in over here. We get some attacking stuff going on. We get some sacrifices. It's a completely different opening. No, I don't want to save that. I mean, look at this. Where now it's like a King's Indian. But because we haven't played knight f6, we got this f5. Is that better or is that worse? Because our king is still in the center. It's completely different. And so, what I'm talking, that was what, 5, 6 games, which by, again, move 7 by move 8 are all fundamentally different from each other. Extremely different in many ways. And I'm trying to summarize this and talk about plans. So, right off, especially when we talk about this G6 move order, which is my favorite, it can be extremely difficult to summarize. And honestly, this is why I love the opening so much. Because again, when you do something like e4, e5, which is a perfectly fine, good move, of course, but if you play 10 games or you play 100 games, it's like you've played them all. The positions are very, very similar to each other. There are a few surprises. Versus, in this, it seems almost as if every game is its own surprise. And, whenever I feel, whenever I have felt as if, I don't want to say bored, but less enchanted with chess, often it's this opening, which it seems to bring about unique, incredible positions. And it's new problems for both white and black to solve, and it rekindles that love, if you will. And so, and this is also true for the other move order. The thing is, with the d6 and knight f6, which generally forces the knight c3, things tend to be a little bit more thematic, which is why we're actually going to explore this position just a little bit more, because it's easier for me to explain. I have far more experience in the g6 system, but again, the ideas are more or less similar. It's just there's a whole bunch of more flexibility and ideas associated here. Anyway, that's enough of that. What are the ideas? I'm going to break it down. I'm going to let's start with white. What can white do? And really, let's look at, taking the center, plays knight c3. It's really right here. White has 3 real options. Okay, he's got like a billion options, but his ideas are, okay, he's going to try and checkmate black immediately, he's going to crush black with pawns, or he's going to do something else. Let's look at the pawns right away. This is the closest thing there is to a main line as far as I know. And what we can see here, and let's just do a couple of moves, is that this idea from white is extremely standard. He's got 3 pawns in the center, which are absolutely beautiful. This makes sense because black's whole opening is not putting pawns in the center. This is what's known as the hypermodern school of chess. He's hoping that white, well, first he's letting white get a center, and then he's going to see if he can counterattack. Or maybe he wants white to overextend. For instance, if we back up, instead of bishop d3, e5 is a very common idea. But then we can do something like this. Maybe white develops, maybe we've got something like this. And we can see the pawns are striking out, hitting. All of a sudden there might be mass exchanges, which could be extremely dangerous because white's king is still in the center. Even if white does castle, he spent a lot of time moving pawns, which by definition is time that he's not using to develop his pieces or castle or do something else. And often black is able to strike back, either by creating a weak pawn, or by opening the center and leaving the king with white still there. Or you can imagine he's opening the king side. The f-pawn comes in, opening the f-file for his rook. Again, before white has castled, or even if white has castled, that can be extremely dangerous. Imagine white castles and the queen comes over here to b6, where there's some x-ray potential checks coming in. Always got to be very careful. Also, if these pawns start exchanging themselves, this bishop comes completely to life. If we back up, as soon as white plays e5, and then we move back, it looks like the bishop is terrible. But because of these pawn breaks, the bishop won't stay terrible. Very rarely does it stay terrible. And so white needs to time this e5 move very, very carefully, lest his king gets stuck in the center, or he gets stuck with a bad pawn, or things, go downhill. Alternatively, black has to be careful, because if white can do this without suffering, then white's just probably going to be winning. Because look at this, he has a huge space advantage. His pawns are beautiful, all of black's pieces suck. I mean, black hasn't wasted a lot of time, but he doesn't have a lead in development either. What's really happening? So this is the big sort of question in these positions, is can white advance with his pawns and crush in the center, or is black able to counterattack and strike back? In general, black really, when I play these openings, I've always enjoyed when white pushes ahead first, because I find as black, I get more chances, more ability to counterattack. Versus, if we go back, if white's more restrained, let's say with bishop d3, and then we castle. So now white's castled, white's done everything. Right now we can really think about e5, so often black will want to play e5 instead. And then we've got this sort of central tension, or exchanges. Anything is possible, or you could just leave it and let black take on one of these, and then you recapture with this, or you recapture with this. Again, there's so many possibilities about how this game may or may not go. It's some of the flexibility based on what you want to do from here. But notice how in this position, black has finally claimed some of the center. And he has to do that, because otherwise e5 is coming and he's going to be in trouble. So in these hypermodern openings, black is letting white have the center, but not forever. Because if you just give white the center and you just sit back and do nothing, well, you're going to lose. White's going to get a huge advantage. And so this is one of the ideas, where white gets the pawns, and the question is, can he push in with e5? Maybe he can push in with f5 if black is lazy. There's also d5, and the question is, how is black going to chip away? Again, if white pushes with e5 very, very quickly, the plan is generally to come back with that c5 move. And if white delays pushing with e5, often black gets e5 in himself. Those are generally the ideas in this type of big center position. But again, I must stress this is very general. In fact, there are so many ideas. In fact, there are ideas where black, for instance, can play c6 after castle, then he plays d5. And this looks kind of funky because white's getting this big center. But then things aren't so clear, because after the knight comes back, it's got a nice square here, or maybe the bishop has a nice square here. He's going to play e6, and things have suddenly gotten blocked up. White center isn't the huge asset, and things become slower. This is a possible way of playing. It's more common, actually. In this position, if I remember my theory, which in all honesty I might not, is to play something like c6 here, and then play d5. Then even moving the knight all the way back here to h8, which looks crazy. But the idea would be to go here, here, exchange the bishop, play e6, maybe exchange this bishop, because when the center is so blocked, doesn't again, so many different ideas. And lest this video would go on an hour, I'm going to stop here. But this is another different way of playing, where instead of hitting back with e5, hit back with d5. So that's kind of this big center approach, and I hope I didn't completely butcher that. Again, if this is hard to follow with the ideas, it's because the ideas are so general and so broad, and there's exceptions, and there's counter ideas with everything. This is why these positions, sometimes they're recommended to beginners, because look, black will always do this setup no matter what white does, and so he's going to get out of the opening, and then he'll figure something out, which technically is true, but they require so much flexibility and creativity and calculation and time. This is not a beginner opening. That said, you're going to find people play it. What do you do? So the second white idea is, instead of trying to checkmate with the pawns right away, f4 and f5 or e5, well, g4, okay, no, is something like this, where, okay, after g6, with this f3. And for instance, white will then do this. Let's just do one more move. Let's do this, castle. Very, very common setup, especially at the club level, because this is a very easy idea to understand. If you remember, or you watch the video on the Sicilian and the Sicilian Dragon, you'll see some similarities here. We've castled opposite sides, and so the idea is quite simple. White is going to checkmate black, and black's going to try and checkmate white with a direct attack. And so the idea is, again, we've got the pawn storm now coming, we've got this guy coming in, and it's just like the Sicilian Dragon. Versus, and if you're to look at this, if you remember the dragon, white's got the exact same attack, but black, well, he doesn't have any of the queenside developed yet. He doesn't have the open C file, so he's going to be doing something more like this, and well, even then, he doesn't even have an open file. So it looks like white's attacking faster. Honestly, that's probably true. White's attack is faster compared to the dragon, but white does not have this bishop developed over here, and he still has this knight. In the dragon, the knight is generally on d4, where it might sacrifice here, or it might come back to defend. These pieces are kind of in the way. Let's just imagine for a second that white does, okay, open the h file. Well, he wants to get this rook in to help, but the bishop and the knight are both in the way. So white's going to have to spend time, moving those pieces somewhere to let this rook come in. And so black's attack is slower, but white's attack is also a little bit slower. And so it's a game. But at the same time, this is what it's going to be like. It's going to be a race. It's going to be a king hunt. And games can be pretty exciting. You have to enjoy this type of position if you want to play these openings as black. If you do not like these race, king hunt, all-out mating attacks with pawn storms, then this is definitely not the opening for you. And so again, in general, black's counterattack does start usually with c6, b5, b4, and then later maybe a c5 or a5, a4, and then open lines, see what happens next. And white, of course, is the exact opposite. So that's it. So strategically, it's a really easy position to understand. Both sides are throwing pawns, trying to get checkmate. It's a bit harder in practice, and it can be a lot of fun if you enjoy these positions. And then, so those are the two main ideas. Probably the two most common plans, where white either gets a really big center, and then we see what happens, or white does some combination of this and tries to checkmate black with a huge attack. And so the third possibility is everything else, which is a kind of a catch-all, of course. There is so many ideas. Just in this position here alone, there are ideas of let's bring the knight to e2, then to g3. Why? Because if we put the knight, let me do that here. Just imagine this here. The knight here supports both of these pawn breaks, which could help with the kingside attack. So that's a possibility. White could play, h3, just preventing this bishop from coming out and then seeing what happens. Similar to certain modern lines of the Najdorf and other popular openings. White can play g3 with bishop g2, just fianchettoing the bishop, trying to see what happens, delaying what he wants to do. There are all sorts of ideas with bishop to g5, perhaps tempting black, to maybe move some of these pawns forward, especially if we go back to here. We don't want to do that just yet, because the queen controls that square. I don't want to jump ahead of myself. So are these pawns a strength, or are they a weakness? Well, you might say it's a weakness, but black hasn't castled yet. Maybe black leaves his king in the center, he throws the pawns forward, or maybe he castles queenside. So many ideas. It's so incredibly flexible, and there's so much more of what we could talk about. If we back up, let me just make a random move. Let me make the simplest move for white. Black will almost always play bishop g7 and castle. That's extremely common, what black generally wants to do. And then from there, again, black is so flexible. He can play with e5. He can play with c5. He could play with b6 and c5. He could play with b6, bishop b7, just trying to pressure the center. He can play with a6, b5, b4, again, putting the bishop here. So many possibilities. But the last one I want to cover is just one of those ideas that when I first found in a game, I wish I still remembered which game it were. I don't. So I'm just inventing something here, so don't take this as theory. But one idea, an incredibly amazing idea, was whose turn is it? Okay. Is where, come on, failed the bishop, beautiful. Where black doesn't castle right away, and then let's just imagine something like this. Imagine something like this, in which a very common idea is where, white's going to try and play some h4, h5 coming in. Whose turn is it? Black. And so one of the most interesting and creative and fantastic ideas, especially against this type of castling, is where black would leave his king in the center. He would do something like h5, and then play h4, with the idea of bringing the rook here, and then sliding the rook over here, maybe not to that square, but somewhere here on the 5th rank, to try and attack. And so his king is in the center, but he's developing his rook along this. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the best position or anything. I just want to highlight this idea because when do you ever see a rook, developed with the king in the center and we push the h-pawns or the a-pawns to get the rook and to slide over? It's magical. And it seems the more you play these types of openings, the more this type of magic that you find. And it's again, it's amazing, and it's so hard to describe these openings. It's almost, indescribable. Unfortunately, on the higher levels, this isn't a very popular opening. That suggests it's maybe not as sound as some of the other openings, but you know what? It is a heck of a lot of fun. And again, if you're a beginner or early intermediate, this probably isn't the opening that you want to play. But you know what? If you play just for fun and you enjoy these creative positions, which aren't anything like E4, E5, the Italian game, the Petrov, all those openings that we played a million times, like, this is it. And again, if you play chess for fun, sometimes it's just have some fun. Just throw caution. Let's see what happens. Play 10 games. Play 15 games. Play some blitz and just enjoy not having the same opening, the same type of position every single game. Because at the end of the day, like, that's what we want. We want to have some fun, right? And I find, especially starting with G6, with the infinite flexibility, where you have the option of sometimes putting the knight here, or just don't develop the knight, why not? It can be a heck of a lot of fun. If you're at all interested in learning more about this, especially the G6 system, you want to look for, I actually got it over here, 1 second. Where is it? This is the book that you want. This is the Modern Tiger, Tiger Heel Up Person, which details the modern. This is where I first learned about this opening. It was through the first edition. This is the second edition. But it was through this, and he's a great writer. It's filled with games. It's not theory. It's just, if you're at all interested, this is the resource that you want. There's also, I believe, he did a DVD with Simon Williams. So if you want to go the video route, that's an option. Check out the Ginger GM. I always recommend Simon Williams. He's a great instructor, and so his products deserve to be promoted. Anyway, so that's that. I'm going to cut it short there. Hopefully that was at least somewhat understandable. This is not the most understandable opening. It's its own thing. It's magic, and that's what I love about it. Anyway, so that's that. So SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. I'm going to try and get several more of these videos out before I move down to Toronto. So I'll try and see if I can cover the entire 1E4 spectrum, but no promises. We'll see what happens. Moving's tough. Anyway, so that's that. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. Comments, criticisms, let me know. Bye for now.